Welcome again to our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. We're working our way through the book of Proverbs, as many of you know, and we are looking at various themes that are found in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is different than any other book of the Bible in that, starting with chapter 10 in particular, we just have proverbs that are not promises or proverbs or general statements of truth. They're not promises. They don't always guarantee what they seem to be saying, but they're telling us here's how life generally works. If you do this, this will happen. If you do the other will happen, and so forth. And we learn a great deal of wisdom from the Proverbs. There's one subject, however, in particular that is grouped as just in one location in the book, and we have a running theme. Most of the Proverbs, if you get two back-to-back on the same theme, that's unusual. Usually it's one verse and then another verse on a totally different subject. But there is one theme that Solomon wants to address, and he addresses it in the first 9 chapters quite often, and especially in chapters 5, 6, and 7. And that is the issue of morality or immorality. And we should keep in mind that several times, especially in the early portions of the book, he says something like, my son, and maybe even on occasion, my sons. And so we think then that, at least to some degree, Solomon is addressing this whole thing to his son, or if he had more than one son, we don't know who that is. We only know of Rehoboam. But he is giving wisdom to his son. He wants his son to know how to navigate life in all these areas we've been talking about for the last several weeks. And he also wants his son to be able to handle the issue of morality or immorality as well. And so he really loads up on that subject in chapters 5, 6, and 7. This is an important subject for all generations, for all people, certainly for us today. So we're going to spend this whole week looking at mainly chapters 5, 6, and 7 and what Solomon has to say to his son about that subject and to us as well. We're going to start today with chapter 7. And we're looking at some pictures, word pictures that he's given us of somebody who's getting caught up in an immoral type of situation. And we're going to look today at the first picture, and that is of the young man who is going to get caught up in this. And once again, Solomon might have in mind his own son. Not that his own son was doing this, but he's just wanting to relate to his son and says, son, this is what could happen to you. So he starts out in chapter 7 and verse 7 by describing this young man who is playing with fire, literally, as we'll see in some other verses later in the week. But we start with verse 6 actually. We have Solomon perhaps looking out the window of his house. In verse 6, I looked out through my lattice. So this is whether it's literally happened or he's just giving us a picture of what could happen. We don't know. But he's looking out the window, and what does he see? Well, he sees this young man he saw among the naive and discerned among the youth. So he sees a young person, and in this case it's a man, and he calls him here naive. Another translation is simple. So they playing with something that they don't understand, and they do not really realize the consequences of what they're doing. And so he calls this young man naive. And again, he's talking to a young man because I think he's talking to his sons. And this one is undiscerning. He hasn't figured it out. He's making some real bad calculations with his life. And he says also concerning this young man that he lacks sense. To lack sense in verse 7 is the idea of someone who simply does not get the point, does not get the picture. In 6:32, he said something very similar to that. If I can unravel my note here. He says, the one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. There's the point. Then same person, this one who commits adultery lacks sense, and they destroy themselves in the process. He's very concerned about that. Verse 8, he says he sets himself up. Passing through the street near her corner, he takes a way to her house. So this young man just might be walking near the location of someone that could entice him. And maybe he doesn't necessarily mean to go there, but the next thing we see, he's on his way to her house. And then we find out in verse 9 that he's being deceptive in the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. And so he's trying to cover up what he's doing. He's hiding. He doesn't want anybody to see what he's doing. He knows it's wrong. Whenever we're hiding, we know we're wrong. And so he knows he's wrong, but he doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to be seen. And so he's learned to be deceptive. One of the most awful things about sin is that in order to carry it out, especially on a regular basis, we have to learn to be deceitful in the process. Ugly thing to learn. We don't want to learn it. So that's our first picture, the picture of a young man on his way to disaster. Now we're going to pick up tomorrow with 2 other pictures that fills out this storyline that Solomon is giving us. So join us tomorrow and we'll continue this story.